Welcome to Mr. Horror, the home of the scariest stories on YouTube. Get ready to be spooked as we bring you bone-chilling tales of horror and the paranormal. It was a dark and stormy night when a group of friends decided to explore the abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. They had heard rumors of strange things happening there, and they wanted to see for themselves. As they approached the hospital, they could feel the sense of foreboding that hung in the air. The building loomed before them, dark and ominous. They hesitated for a moment before venturing inside. As they made their way through the abandoned hospital, they could hear strange noises coming from the empty halls. Doors creaked and moaned as the wind blew through the broken windows. Shadows flickered on the walls, and they could feel eyes watching them from the darkness. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream from somewhere deep within the hospital. They froze in terror, unsure of what to do next. But then they heard a voice whispering in their ear, telling them to run. They turned to leave, but the door they had entered through was now locked. They were trapped, with no way out. The only sound now was their own ragged breathing as they realized that they were not alone in the hospital. Something was with them, something evil and sinister. As they tried to find a way out, they stumbled upon an old room filled with medical equipment and surgical tools. It was then that they noticed the stains on the walls and the rusted instruments lying on the tables. They realized with horror that this was where experiments had been carried out on unwilling patients. Their fear grew as they heard footsteps approaching, getting closer and closer. They huddled together, trying to stay quiet, hoping that whatever was coming wouldn't find them. But then they saw a shadowy figure looming in the darkness, its eyes gleaming with malice. They screamed in terror and ran as fast as they could, not daring to look back. They finally found a door that opened, and they burst out into the cold night air. They never looked back, never spoke of what they had seen. But they knew that the abandoned hospital held dark secrets that should never be uncovered. As the group of friends stumbled out of the abandoned hospital, they were breathing heavily and shaking with fear. They knew they had narrowly escaped something truly evil, something that should never be unearthed again. But as they made their way back to their car, they realized that something was wrong. One of their friends was missing. They called out his name, but there was no response. They searched the area around the hospital, but he was nowhere to be found. As they made their way back to town, they contacted the authorities to report their missing friend. But as they told their story, they could feel the disbelief in the voice on the other end of the line. They knew that no one would believe the horrors they had witnessed in the abandoned hospital. Days turned into weeks, and the missing friend was never found. The group of friends tried to move on with their lives, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they had left something behind in that dark and desolate hospital. One night, one of the friends woke up to find himself standing in front of the abandoned hospital. He had no memory of how he got there or why he was there, but he knew he had to go inside. He felt drawn to the hospital as if some unseen force was pulling him in. As he entered the hospital, he felt a cold chill run down his spine. He could hear voices whispering in the darkness, calling out to him. He knew he should turn back, but he couldn't. He was compelled to keep going. He made his way through the halls of the abandoned hospital, feeling more and more lost with each passing moment. The darkness seemed to swallow him up, and he could feel himself slipping into a state of panic. Suddenly, he saw a figure in the distance, standing in the shadows. He couldn't make out who it was, but he knew that it was not someone he wanted to meet. He tried to turn and run, but his feet wouldn't move. The figure started to move closer, and he could feel the presence of something truly evil. He knew he had to face it head-on, or he would never escape the hospital. As the figure in the shadows got closer, the friend realized with horror that it was the missing member of their group. He was no longer the same person they had known. His eyes were empty, and his face was twisted into a mask of pain and fear. The friend tried to run, but the missing member of their group was too fast. He grabbed the friend and pulled him into a room, locking the door behind them. The room was filled with medical equipment and surgical tools, just like the room they had found earlier. But this time, there was a figure lying on the operating table, covered in blood and bandages. The missing member of their group explained that he had been taken by the evil presence in the abandoned hospital. He had been experimented on, just like the others who had come before him. But he had somehow survived, and now he was possessed by the same evil that had claimed the hospital. He told the friend that the only way to escape was to perform the same experiments on him, to transfer the evil from him to someone else. The friend knew he had no choice, so he reluctantly agreed. As he began to perform the experiments, he could feel the evil energy coursing through his body. He knew that he had made a terrible mistake, but it was too late to turn back now. Finally, the experiments were complete. The missing member of their group was no longer possessed, but the friend could feel the same evil energy inside of him. He knew that he was now the one who would haunt the abandoned hospital. He left the hospital, feeling lost and alone. He knew that he could never go back, but he also knew that he could never escape the evil that had claimed him. Years later, the friend returned to the abandoned hospital. He wanted to see if the evil still lingered, if the experiments had truly worked. As he walked through the empty halls, he could feel the presence of the evil energy all around him. Suddenly, he heard a voice calling out to him, a voice he knew all too well. It was the missing member of their group, still possessed by the same evil energy that had claimed him so long ago. The friend realized with horror that the experiments had not worked, that the evil was still alive and well. He turned and ran as fast as he could, but he knew that he would never escape the abandoned hospital. To this day, people still hear strange noises and see unexplained figures in the abandoned hospital. Some say that it's haunted by the ghosts of the patients who were experimented on there. Others say that it's the evil energy still lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. There was an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town that had been closed down for years. The old building stood there like a dark and ominous sentinel, surrounded by overgrown weeds and broken fences. Rumors circulated among the townspeople that the hospital had been a site of illegal medical experiments and that the patients had been mistreated and left to die. Others said that the hospital was haunted by the ghosts of the patients who had never left. One night, a group of teenagers decided to explore the abandoned hospital. They were looking for a thrill, and they thought that the old building would be the perfect place to find it. As they approached the hospital, they could feel a sense of unease in the air. The building was dark and foreboding, and they could hear strange noises coming from inside. Undeterred, they entered the hospital and began to explore the empty halls. The air was stale and musty, and the walls were covered in peeling paint and mold. As they moved deeper into the hospital, they found a room filled with medical equipment and surgical tools. The sight of the equipment sent shivers down their spines, and they knew that they had stumbled onto something sinister. Suddenly, they heard a noise coming from down the hall. It was a low, guttural sound, like the sound of someone in pain. They cautiously made their way down the hall, following the sound. As they turned a corner, they came face to face with a figure in the shadows. The figure was hunched over, with its back to them. They could hear it breathing heavily, and they could feel its malevolent energy all around them. As they watched in horror, the figure turned around to face them. Its face was twisted into a mask of pain and fear, and its eyes were empty and soulless. The teenagers tried to run, but the figure was too fast. It grabbed one of them and pulled them into a nearby room, locking the door behind them. The rest of the group was left outside, screaming in terror as they heard their friends' cries of pain and agony coming from inside the room. They knew that they had to get out of there, but they also knew that they couldn't leave their friend behind. What they didn't know was that the hospital was alive with a malevolent energy, an evil force that had claimed the souls of everyone who had ever entered its walls. And now, the teenagers were the hospital's next victims. The group of teenagers outside the locked room knew they had to act fast. They banged on the door, calling out their friend's name, but there was no answer. One of them suggested breaking down the door, but they quickly realized that it was reinforced with steel. They were trapped outside with no way to get in. As they looked around for a way out, they noticed something strange happening to the building. The walls were shifting and contorting like they were alive. The building seemed to be getting larger, with new rooms and hallways appearing out of nowhere. The teenagers were disoriented and frightened, not knowing which way to turn. They heard their friends' screams getting louder, and they knew they had to find a way in. As they searched for a key or a tool to break the door down, they stumbled upon a hidden room. The room was filled with medical records and documents detailing the experiments that had taken place in the hospital. The teenagers were horrified by what they read, and they realized that they were dealing with something far more sinister than they had imagined. Suddenly, the building shook violently, and the walls began to close in on them. They could feel the malevolent energy of the hospital closing in, suffocating them. They knew they had to find a way out, and fast. They frantically searched the room for an escape route, and finally, they found a small window. One by one, they climbed through the window and out onto the roof of the hospital. From there, they could see the whole town, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They knew that they had narrowly escaped with their lives, but they also knew that they would never be the same again. As they made their way back to town, they could still hear their friends' screams echoing in their minds. They knew that they had to find a way to stop the evil that lurked within the abandoned hospital before it claimed any more innocent lives. The teenagers went to the authorities with the information they had found in the hidden room. The police investigated the abandoned hospital, but they found nothing. The building had disappeared, as if it had never existed in the first place. The teenagers were left with more questions than answers, and they knew that they would never be able to forget what they had experienced. Years later, the truth about the abandoned hospital was finally uncovered. It was discovered that the hospital had been the site of illegal medical experiments and that the patients had been subjected to horrific treatments and experiments. The building had been shut down and abandoned, but the malevolent energy that had taken hold of the hospital never left. The building had become a conduit for evil, and anyone who entered its walls became its victim. The teenagers who had entered the abandoned hospital that night were lucky to have escaped with their lives. They had faced the darkness that lurked within the building, and they had emerged on the other side, forever changed. The abandoned hospital still stands on the outskirts of town, a dark and ominous reminder of the evil that lurks in the shadows. The stories of what happened within its walls are still told to this day, and the fear it instills in those who hear them is just as real as it was all those years ago. The teenagers who had faced the horror of the abandoned hospital knew that they had come face to face with true evil. They had been changed forever by what they had experienced, and they would never forget the terror that had haunted them for years to come. The abandoned hospital sat on the edge of town like a dark, ominous shadow. For years, it had stood empty and abandoned, its walls covered in vines and graffiti. But there were rumors that something was still alive inside the hospital, something malevolent and dangerous. A group of teenagers, curious and fearless, decided to investigate. They snuck into the hospital late at night, hoping to uncover the secrets that lurked within. As they made their way through the dark and decaying corridors, they could feel the weight of the hospital's history pressing down on them. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay, and they could hear strange noises echoing in the distance. The group split up to search the hospital, each one hoping to find something that would explain the rumors they had heard. But as they explored the abandoned building, they began to realize that they were not alone. Strange things began to happen. Doors that they had opened were suddenly locked behind them. Whispers echoed in the empty halls, and then they saw her. A young girl, dressed in a hospital gown, appeared in front of them. Her eyes were hollow, and her skin was ghostly pale. She reached out to them, beckoning them to follow her, but as they drew closer, they realized that there was something horribly wrong with her. Her movements were jerky and unnatural, and her face twisted into a grotesque grin. The teenagers were frozen with fear, unsure of what to do. But as they backed away from the girl, they realized that they were surrounded. More ghosts, dressed in hospital gowns, emerged from the shadows. They advanced on the teenagers, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The teenagers knew they had to get out of the hospital, and fast. But as they turned to run, they found that they were trapped. The ghosts had surrounded them, and there was no escape. They knew that they were in grave danger and that they might never make it out of the abandoned hospital alive. The teenagers found themselves trapped in the abandoned hospital, surrounded by the ghosts of patients who had died there long ago. The ghosts moved closer, their ghostly moans echoing through the empty halls. One of the teenagers, a brave girl named Emily, remembered something she had read about ghosts. She knew that they were often tied to specific objects or places, and that breaking that connection could free them from their torment. She grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and began smashing the objects around her, hoping to break the connection that was binding the ghosts to the hospital. As she smashed the objects, the ghosts began to fade away, their spectral forms dissolving into nothingness. The teenagers saw their chance and ran for the exit, hoping to escape the building before any more ghosts appeared. But as they ran, they realized that they were not alone. Something was following them. Something that was even more dangerous than the ghosts. A figure appeared in front of them, its body twisted and contorted into a grotesque shape. It let out a guttural growl, and the teenagers knew that they were facing something truly evil. They tried to run, but the figure was too fast. It cornered them in a room, and the teenagers knew that they were trapped. Suddenly, Emily had an idea. She remembered something she had read about evil spirits. She knew that they were vulnerable to certain types of symbols, like a cross or a Star of David. She drew a star on the ground with her finger, hoping that it would be enough to keep the evil spirit at bay. And to her surprise, it worked. The evil spirit let out a blood-curdling scream and disappeared into the shadows. The teenagers were safe, but they knew that they had come close to facing true horror. The teenagers ran out of the abandoned hospital, their hearts pounding with fear. They knew that they had faced something truly evil and that they were lucky to have escaped with their lives. As they stumbled out into the fresh air, they realized that something had changed. They had faced their fears and come out on the other side. They felt stronger, more alive. But as they looked back at the abandoned hospital, they saw something that chilled them to the bone. The hospital was glowing with an otherworldly light, and they could see the silhouettes of the ghosts inside. They knew that the evil had not been fully defeated, and that the abandoned hospital was still a place of great danger. But they also knew that they had faced their fears and emerged victorious. From that day forward, the teenagers were different. They knew that they could face anything, no matter how terrifying, and come out on the other side. They had faced true horror, and they had survived. but the memory of the abandoned hospital would stay with them forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of the world. Thank you for watching these 3 true abandoned hospital horror stories. We hope they sent shivers down your spine and kept you hooked until the very end. If you enjoyed these stories, please like and subscribe to our channel for more terrifying tales. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time, remember that true horror is all around us, lurking in the shadows and waiting to be discovered. Stay safe, and may the ghost of the abandoned hospital never haunt your dreams.